Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Ron DeSantis, governor of the third largest state in the United Corporations of America, which he calls the free state of Florida. Well, new reporting shows that his idea of a free state seems to be more closely aligned with the Orwellian book 1984 and a dystopian totalitarianism state. If we take a look at this really great reporting from Jason Garcia, you could check out his Substack at Seeking Rents. Records obtained through a series of public records requests show that DeSantis' office recently developed a sweeping plan to overhaul higher education oversight in Florida. The governor's proposal would have centralized more power in boards run by the governor's political appointees, made colleges and universities more dependent on money controlled by politicians in Tallahassee, and imposed more restrictions on what schools can teach. The DeSantis plan would have stripped university presidents of the ability to hire professors. Higher education isn't the governor's only potential target. The record shows that DeSantis staff also grew up proposals targeting newspapers, state attorneys, and school boards. They devised plans to take control of everything from local toll road agencies to high school sports. And amidst it all, they wanted to make it harder to legally challenge the governor's own authority. Yeah, quite the free state his administration and he has been envisioning. All these ideas were included in legislation drafted at the request of the governor's office in the weeks leading up to the 2022 legislative session, which began in January and ended in March. The drafts surfaced in post-session public records requests seeking copies of communications between DeSantis' office and the legislature. Only a few fragments ultimately made it into bills that were passed into law, though it's not clear whether that was because DeSantis decided not to pursue them right now or whether legislative leaders privately objected. But DeSantis could resurrect any of them in the future, whether through executive edict or if he is reelected this fall in future legislative sessions. The governor's office declined to answer. Shocking. But even if he decides not to do anything further, the DeSantis drafts offer a window into the thinking of one of the most powerful Republicans in the U.S. who's widely expected to run for president. Before we move further, we should point out Ron DeSantis just got in front of the cameras and attacked President Biden and his administration's disinformation board, which is really just a ministry of truth. Now, rhetorically and visually, people thought, hey, I'm glad Ron DeSantis is calling this out. We can't have the federal government pushing a ministry of truth, a disinformation board. Who is the federal government or any government to be dictating what is true information, what is false information, what are conspiracy theories, et cetera, et cetera. And thankfully, Biden's disinformation board lasted about as long as CNN Plus. What's interesting is if you actually look at Ron DeSantis, he is totally for the government basically dictating information. What is good information to teach students? What is bad information or history to teach students? So rhetorically, he seems to be against big government censorship, big government dictating what students can learn, what governments or public schools can teach. But if you actually look at what he's trying to do in Florida, he might even go further than Biden and the Democrats were trying to do. Let's take a look. Ron DeSantis had state lawmakers prepare many pieces of legislation in the run-up to the 2022 legislative session. Some led to the session's most bitter culture war battles. Others never saw the light of day. None of the DeSantis drafts was far more reaching than his higher education package. The 70-page proposal sought to strip public universities and colleges of individual autonomy and concentrate decision-making power in Tallahassee under the Board of Governors, which oversees universities, and the Board of Education, which oversees community college. For instance, the legislation would have given the Board of Governors more authority to initiate investigations of university presidents, veto school budgets, and fire university employees. It would have required the board to launch new reviews of existing degree programs, and it would have prohibited the board from delegating many of its administrative powers to individual universities. Why is this important? The governor has enormous control over the Board of Governors, where he appointed 14 of 17 members, and the Board of Education, where he appoints all 7 members. DeSantis has stacked both board with friends, fundraisers, and ideological loyalists. His appointments include a donor who once gave DeSantis a place to live when he needed a new address, a former education secretary who presided over the failed privatization of the entire school district, a woman who has expressed support for January 6 rioters and QAnon conspiracy theory that government, business, and media are controlled by Satan-worshiping pedophiles, an attorney who defends Republican dark money groups, a Boca Raton doctor, an investor who gave DeSantis $50,000 1 week before his appointment, and who has given DeSantis more than $75,000 more since, the CEO of utility giant Florida Power and Light, and a lobbyist for Walmart. Boy, if this man becomes president, talk about draining the swamp. He might be literally building an entire bigger swamp than already exists in DC, believe it or not. But if you look further into this report, the really eyebrowsing thing is here. The most eyebrowsing example, DeSantis' plan would have put a university's board, rather than its president, in charge of hiring faculty. Even if the board wanted to delegate hiring decisions to its president, the legislation would have still required it to approve every hire. Trustees would have also had to confirm the appointments, reappointments, and contracts of every member of a president's executive management team. And presidents would have had to provide boards with annual performance reviews for every university employee who makes more than $100,000 a year. Again, DeSantis has tremendous power over university boards, which are typically made up of 13 members, including 6 appointed directly by the governor and 5 chosen by DeSantis' controlled board of governors. So essentially what you have here is like Rick Snyder in Michigan did for Flint, inserting an emergency manager to run Flint, which was nothing more than essentially just a puppet proxy for Governor Snyder. Governor Snyder was calling the shots in Flint through his emergency manager. What Ron DeSantis is trying here is to essentially make his board supersede the power of university presidents, university faculty, and essentially have Ron DeSantis through his board running universities. Yeah, talk about the free state of Florida. It gets worse, though. This is potentially the worst part. One version of the legislation specifically ordered cuts to universities and colleges that don't participate in DeSantis's, quote, intellectual diversity surveys, which critics have called an attempt to target professors and academic programs that Republican leadership don't like. Another version of the bill would have made the university and college system submit reports every 3 months, assuring the governor and the legislature that schools aren't defying any orders from Tallahassee. And of course, DeSantis would have used the legislation to inflame further culture wars by imposing new restrictions on what could be taught in general education courses. General education courses would have had to, quote, promote the philosophical underpinnings of Western civilization. Let me repeat. General education courses would have had to, quote, promote the philosophical underpinnings of Western civilization. And they would have been forbidden from including any, quote, curriculum that teaches identity politics, such as critical race theory. This is from the proposed law. General education courses must promote the philosophical underpinnings of Western civilization and include studies of this nation's historical documents, such as the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and subsequent amendments, and the Federalist Papers. General education courses may not suppress or distort significant historical events or include curriculum that teaches identity politics, such as critical race theory, or defines American history as contrary to the creation of a new nation based on universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence. Let's repeat this. General education courses may not suppress or distort historical events, but in the same breath cannot teach critical race theory, i.e., the truth about slavery, the truth, frankly, about us murdering, kidnapping, raping Native Americans. So, yeah, we can only teach about historical events that make white people less guilty. I mean, you really can't make this up. And the truth of the matter is, if a few things go a different way, I mean, Biden has a 75 right now. 75% of the country think the country is on the wrong track. Biden has lower approvals than Trump did at this point. It looks like there's going to be a Republican bloodbath politically in November, and they're going to take back the House, possibly the Senate too. And then we're going to have a year and a half of impeachment hearings and other things against Biden, and worse gridlock than we have now. They might have trouble making bipartisan deals to name a post office under Republican leadership. So what you have here is essentially, if Trump doesn't run, or for whatever reason, Trump runs, but doesn't have the same stranglehold over the Republican Party. Polling shows he's ahead of DeSantis, but who knows? Or if Trump has more legal or criminal issues, it's very likely Ron DeSantis, running on the culture wars, running on faux populism, would defeat another neoliberal Democrat, whether it's Biden running again on nothing, or Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, name your neoliberal corporate hack. It's very likely, not very likely, but it's very possible this might be the next president. And looking what he's doing in Florida, or what he wants to do, which is essentially a 1984 dystopian hellhole where the government dictates what's taught in schools. The government dictates who can hire faculty at schools. The government teaches, the government dictates what is the appropriate history to teach. Yeah, I think this is kind of opposite of a free state. This is an authoritarian playbook. This is somebody who, if he were president, in the face of Black Lives Matter and things like that, not only could try and use his police to crack down, but could use his administration and the education department to completely whitewash history, to basically further incite bigotry and racism, not through the methods that Trump used, which was let's ban Muslims from coming into the country and a lot of his anti-Mexican talk, but through the education curriculum, ginning up older white conservatives who want their version of history taught, which means not teaching what actually this country's roots are based on. This is scary stuff. And this isn't an issue of, oh, but Jordan, the Democrats are awful too. Yeah, we could point out how Democrats are pro-censorship, particularly through using their donors at Silicon Valley to crack down on free speech, particularly to suppress anti-war, anti-capitalist voices. We should call out the Democratic Party. I certainly do. But if you're not calling this out, if you're not calling out a Republican, whether it's surprising or not is irrelevant. This is straight up 1984 dystopian authoritarianism and totalitarianism, what Ron DeSantis is trying to do in Florida. So when you hear people looking at Ron DeSantis and saying, oh, you know, he's against censorship, he's pro-free speech, that's laughable. What he's trying to do in Florida is literally have the government take over the history curriculum, take over schools, dangle government money over schools to get his way, so that if universities do not fold and teach what he wants, or not teach what he doesn't want, they won't get the money they need. Teachers will be threatened. Their tenure will be threatened. Faculty positions will be threatened. That's not exactly small government now, is it? So people cannot sleep on Ron DeSantis. That doesn't mean I'm saying, hey, if he's the nominee, you know, vote blue. I'm not telling you who to vote for, but I am telling you what he's doing. I am telling you what he's doing, what he's trying to do. And if he gets away with it in Florida, don't think he's not going to try it nationally. Thanks for watching, and make sure to tune in to Status Coup's daily live stream Monday through Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time and Fridays at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.